Have you ever known someone or maybe experienced this yourself where sometimes the person seemed to be open and wanting connection, and other times it felt like they were pulling away and then they were close again? When someone has a disorganized attachment style, it means they might lean towards either anxious or avoidant attachment style in relationships, or maybe oscillate back and forth between the two. If you are frustrated in dating and relationships, it's helpful to learn everything you can about your attachment style and how it's impacting your relationships. I know the term disorganized attachment can seem a bit judgy, but understanding this attachment style helps you to recognize this attachment pattern in yourself and in the people that you're relating with. And understanding our patterns is the first key to changing them. Ultimately, this understanding helps you to be in a relationship where you feel seen and heard, safe to connect or safe to take your space, and where you can really trust that everything is going to be okay. I'm Kaylee Larkin. I'm an attachment coach, and I help people who feel frustrated and ready to give up on love so they can feel more security, love, and deep connection and build the relationship of their dreams. So let's talk about disorganized attachment style. It is one out of 4 attachment styles that describe how we connect and relate with other people. These styles form when we're very young, and they determine how we connect and bond with other people. The other 3 styles are called anxious, avoidant, and secure. They are attachment adaptations because they happened for a very good reason early on to protect us and to help us survive. You can learn more about the attachment styles in my other posts, but to very briefly summarize, the secure attachment style has the easiest time in relationships. They are comfortable with intimacy, they're used to hearing and expressing needs easily, and they're good at both giving and receiving love. The avoidant attachment style, also called dismissive avoidant, is hyper-independent and tends to dismiss their own emotions and the emotions of other people. Emotional intimacy can be a challenge. You might recognize them as the person who regularly withdraws to work or the gym and has forgotten to call their partner again. And the anxious attachment style, also called ambivalent or preoccupied, is more dependent on others to help them calm. They want connection, yet they can push it away through passive-aggressive behavior and complaining. You might recognize them as the person who's frustrated that they haven't heard back from someone, and they're trying to figure out what that means and if the person still wants to be in a relationship. So what is the disorganized attachment style? Well, the disorganized attachment style is not yet as widely talked about as the anxious and avoidant styles, but it's very important and it shows up more commonly than most people even realize as a secondary or tertiary style. We typically have more than one attachment style in different situations or with different people, but one primary style. When someone has a primary disorganized style, it means they can either lean toward anxious or they can lean toward avoidant attachment, or they can go back and forth between them. In addition, there's a kind of fear component that often stems from trauma or negative life experiences. You might hear the term fearful avoidant. Just remember that the disorganized style can also lean towards anxious. Now, what distinguishes it from the other styles is that particular fear component. So let's talk about what causes disorganized attachment style. What happens to cause disorganized style early on is that the survival instinct and the bonding instinct kind of got cross-wired. This means that whoever a child normally would go to for safety, protection, and comfort, who they would connect with, was also chaotic, confusing, or threatening in some way. Sometimes there were external threats that got in the way of attachment, like medical situations or a dangerous environment that somehow encoded a lack of safety in the nervous system. If a caregiver had a lot of fear and dysregulation, but didn't know how to calm themselves down, the child could spend a lot of time in a more sympathetic state like fight or flight, or a parasympathetic state like dissociation and shutdown. If they tend towards the fight state of the nervous system, they might act out, and the resulting backlash from caregivers or adults could cause even more dysregulation. This reinforces the feeling of not being safe. It is this lack of safety that causes problems with connection, and why people with disorganized attachment can want to connect with other people, but then feel this unease or fear or worry that they'll be judged or taken advantage of. Sometimes this unease happens when getting to know people. Other times it's more when they might need to depend on someone else that fear can kick in. Because they didn't feel enough safety in childhood, the nervous system can tend towards fight, flight, and freeze, and dissociation and shutdown are really common states for people. So let's talk about disorganized attachment characteristics. Like, how do you recognize disorganized attachment? Well, people can feel overwhelmed by their feelings. They can have trouble trusting that other people are safe and that it's okay to get close to them. They might have a fear of getting hurt, a fear of being triggered, or getting overwhelmed by their emotions. This fear can be from unresolved trauma. We learn from our experiences, so if someone never sensed that the original people who were supposed to kind of keep them safe were able to do that, then how are they supposed to go out and get into a relationship as an adult and let down their guard enough to get close to someone? And once they do find someone to trust and enter into a relationship, they can sometimes feel like they're on opposing teams instead of playing on the same side. This can often result in a fair amount of conflict as people struggle with nervous system dysregulation, going into fight, flight, or freeze, often without even realizing it. So how might this play out? Well, suppose someone is in a conversation with a loved one that turns heated, and they start to feel confused and have difficulty finding words, and then they might even feel like they're having trouble talking, partly because there's so much dorsal vagal activity in the nervous system that results in dissociation or shutdown, and there's less activity in the ventral vagal system, which is our social engagement system. The vagus nerve is responsible for controlling the muscles to the throat so they can have trouble getting words out. Other times people don't feel confused or shut down, but instead they're in kind of a fight or flight, so they can feel a lot of anger and have trouble calming themselves down. For example, if someone has a fear of not having control because they didn't have control when they were younger, they can go into more of a fight state, into that nervous system where they're fighting to make sure that they're being heard or respected or their needs are being met. That's one reason why people with disorganized attachment can sometimes struggle with conflict in relationships. They can also interpret others' cues as more threatening if they're coming from a place of dysregulation and focus on external threat. For example, if people are anxious and they look at neutral faces, they can perceive them as threatening. There have been research studies on this. Also, imagine if a partner makes a face that is slightly similar to a negative expression that a caregiver or someone in the past made that was threatening. The brain can promptly go into a protective mode, although the expression may or may not be tied to the same threatening behavior as it had been previously. So let's talk about disorganized attachment in dating. How someone goes about the dating process is largely going to depend on whether they lean more towards the anxious attachment side or more towards the avoidant attachment side. However, what can happen is that because people have more threat in their nervous system, they can sometimes miss cues in the environment and end up in risky situations. So it is helpful to learn what types of people are safe and compatible partners. As people work towards calming the threat response in their systems and aligning towards safety, they also get better at gravitating towards safe, secure relationships. The other adaptation that can happen with disorganized attachment is that the person feels so much lack of safety and trust that they have trouble trusting others and forming secure relationships. During dating, there can be swings between moving closer to a partner and pulling back, depending on where the person is in their threat response. So they might tell the other person how wonderful they are in one moment and then be kind of distant the next. They can also be unsure around how much to share due to boundaries. So they may overshare and then compensate by pulling back, possibly even seem distant or angry. In conversation, they might gaze off into space or appear dissociated or speak in a way that is confusing and hard to follow. They might have big memory gaps or start sentences and then not finish them. Some of these may not arise until they start to get closer in a relationship, as the internal confusion arises between attachment figure and threat. Now, disorganized attachment in relationships. Once in a relationship, triggers will become more obvious, depending on whether they're in an anxious stance or an avoidant stance. They can argue and they can get defensive or shut down and dissociate. But the common theme is dysregulation in the nervous system, so they'll have trouble calming down. Sometimes communication can feel like going in circles where problems just don't get resolved, but there's a lot of emotional reactivity, which might come out as yelling and screaming. It's in the middle of the night, but there's lots of arguing and wondering if they're going to be okay. Because folks with disorganized attachment feel fear and lack of internal calm, they seek to gain control over their environment, such as through requests which come across as demanding or controlling to other people. This is their attempt to create a feeling of safety or order for themselves because they try to create that feeling internally by controlling the external environment, since their internal environment so often feels uncontrollable and chaotic. Triggers for the disorganized style will depend on whether they lean anxious or avoidant, and if they flip back and forth between anxious and avoidant, they will have triggers for both styles. So if they're currently in an anxious stance, they might be triggered by the threat of abandonment, like when someone pulls away or doesn't return a message. On the other hand, if they're in an avoidant stance, they might be more triggered by losing independence or being criticized. Additionally, they can be triggered by someone just getting close because it's activating that pattern that says the person that we attach to is also not a safe person. So the avoidant side can get triggered in situations like moving in together or talking about marriage or children or deeper commitment. But there's this even deeper layer that says the people that we have attachment bonds with aren't safe because this is the original blueprint laid down from when they are young. Let's talk about what helps the disorganized attachment style. It is helpful for someone with this style to learn both how to soothe themselves and how to take in soothing from others. In other words, self-regulation and co-regulation. Being able to calm themselves down will lower the threat response and make other people seem less threatening when they're trying to get close in a normal, healthy way. It will also reduce the feeling of being out of control and needing to control others or the environment in order to feel safe. Developing healthy boundaries for self and others can also be a huge help for the disorganized style. This can mean learning when and how much is appropriate to share and recognizing and honoring their own needs in relationship as well as others. Many people find spiritual growth in working through and letting go of some of the trauma and negative life experiences which have contributed to this attachment adaptation. It is also helpful to work on the anxious or avoidant adaptations, or both, depending on which is present. For example, the disorganized anxious person, they'll benefit from feeling more calm within themselves. And for the disorganized avoidant or fearful avoidant, they can benefit from opening up to greater connection and finding safety and co-regulation. Many people who have already done work on a primary anxious or avoidant adaptation find these additional layers of healing and growth by working through disorganized. If you found this post helpful, you might also enjoy reading or watching videos about the anxious and avoidant attachment styles. You can also find supportive courses, guided visualizations, and other resources at kayleelarkin.com. If you have questions, comment below the video. Thank you so much. If you got something out of watching this, please hit the like button and subscribe button to get more useful content. Your support helps me reach more people. And if you know someone who would like this message, you can also click share to let them know. This is Kaylee Larkin, wishing you a beautiful relational journey.